In the shadows of Manhattan, one clue begins to glow brighter than fear, and the hunt is already closing in. Step closer, if you dare. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Girl Who Waited on 35th Street. The evening had already carved a notch in my patience before the doorbell tried its luck. I was halfway through deciding whether the rain tapping on the stoop was musical or just annoying when I swung the door open and found a girl standing there who looked like she'd taken the full brunt of Manhattan's mood. The rain had rearranged her hair, her coat hung on her like it had lost the will to be useful, and her eyes had the kind of panic that makes men check their wallets and their consciences at the same time. I wasn't expecting a visitor, especially not one who seemed to have been carved out of trouble and wrapped in a drizzle-soaked coat, but New York has a way of throwing curveballs. Some come with a bat behind them. She began, then paused as if remembering her own name required permission. Miss Lydia Shaw. Her voice wavered like she'd borrowed it from someone steadier and hadn't learned the manual yet. Well, Miss Shaw, I said, stepping aside. Either you were born waterproof or you've been standing out there rehearsing. Come in. She crossed the threshold with the caution of someone who wasn't sure if safety came with the entrance fee. I closed the door behind her and brushed a few raindrops off my sleeve. She clutched her handbag like it carried her last remaining breath. I've been waiting, she murmured, on 35th Street. I thought someone would notice me. That wasn't the kind of line you toss into a room without warning. It had drama baked into it, but not the theatrical kind. More like the kind that crawls up your spine and takes a seat. I took her coat and hung it up, then pointed the way to Wolfe's office. She followed, hesitant but moving on the fumes of desperation. When we entered the office, Wolfe glanced up from his chair with the expression he usually reserved for drafts, hiccups, and my attempts at humour before breakfast. Rain streaked down the windows behind him, adding ambiance he'd never requested. "Archie," he said, his eyebrows forming a grim architectural arch. "Explain." "This is Miss Lydia Shaw," I announced, giving her a reassuring nod. "She's got a problem, the sort that can't stay out in the rain." Wolfe let out a long, slow breath that would have insulted a man with thinner skin, then pointed to the red chair opposite his desk. "Sit, and be concise." Miss Shaw sat with the poise of someone who feared sudden movement might shatter her. Wolfe leaned back, his gaze taking her in the way a botanist studies a leaf, sympathetic only if the leaf contributed something to science. "My sister," she began. Her voice trembled, but something in it carried resolve. "She's missing. She hasn't come home in 2 days." Wolfe frowned. "If you intend to engage my services, Miss Shaw, I require clarity, not tremulous insinuation." I shot Wolfe a look that said he could ease off the throttle, but Wolfe ignored me and folded his hands across his middle like he was guarding state secrets. "She works as a hat-check girl," Lydia continued, "at the Satin Crown. 2 nights ago, a man, he had a sapphire ring, gave her an envelope. She showed it to me before she left for her shift. She said it was important, and she was scared. A man with a sapphire ring. That had the makings of a calling card and not the kind you tuck into holiday gift baskets." "And after that?" Wolfe asked. Lydia swallowed. "After that, she never came home. I checked the club. They said she didn't show up that night. That was a lie. I know she went." Wolfe drummed his fingers once, the faintest rhythm of irritation. "You presume deceit readily." "She's my sister," she whispered. "I know when she's lying, and I know when others are lying about her." Her handbag shifted slightly as she tightened her grip. Something inside clinked softly. I tilted my head. "Miss Shaw, mind opening that handbag?" She hesitated, then placed it on her lap and opened the clasp with shaking fingers. Inside was the usual assortment: powder compact, small wallet, handkerchief, plus one item that didn't belong in the average lady's kit, a torn silk claim ticket. One edge was frayed, as if yanked roughly. A pale smudge of violet powder stained the corner. I slipped a glove from my pocket, picked it up delicately, and gave it a fast once-over. "That's hat-check silk," I said, "from the Satin Crown." Lydia nodded. "I found it on her dresser. I think she tore it when something happened." Wolfe stared at the ticket the way a chef examines a suspicious mushroom. The faint aroma of Fritz's cooking filtered through the hallway. Garlic, butter, and promise. My stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since noon, but Wolfe was in business mode. which meant dinner could march right past us and into oblivion. Miss Shaw, Wolfe said, shifting slightly, a monumental gesture for him. You claim your sister disappeared after receiving an envelope from a stranger with a sapphire ring. You believe she went to her workplace but was not seen. You possess a torn claim ticket showing she handled something she wasn't supposed to. The implications are, he paused, giving the sentence enough breath to ripen. Unwelcome. She clasped her hands tightly. I need help. I don't know where else to go. Wolfe sighed. Why me? Why not the police? She flinched. Because my sister wasn't respectable. Not in the way they like. They'll say she left on her own. They won't look for her. They didn't before. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sentimental, but injustice gave him indigestion. That is conjecture, he said. However, not implausible. I stepped closer. Miss Shaw, did your sister tell you anything else that night? Anything about the envelope? She bit her lip. Just that it was from someone important, and that she didn't want to die. That one landed like a dropped safe. Wolfe's frown gained depth. Why did she think she might die? I don't know, Lydia said miserably, but she said the man with the ring had come before. He'd given her errands, messages to deliver. She didn't want to keep doing it. A theme started forming in my mind. Nightclub errand routes, dancers carrying sealed notes, the quiet underbelly of Manhattan nightlife where secrets bought cocktails and fear paid tips. And you waited on 35th Street, I asked. She nodded. For hours. I hoped someone would notice. Someone connected to Mr. Wolfe. Well, I said, if your strategy was to get pneumonia first and attention second, you're right on schedule. Wolfe shot me a look that could have wilted a sturdy pumpkin. Archie, spare us, I grinned. Just lightening the mood. Wolfe snorted, his version of a compliment. He adjusted himself in his chair, settling his shoulders. Miss Shaw, I will consider taking your case. However, here came the ritual. I must insist upon candour. If you conceal anything, I will withdraw immediately. I will not be deceived. Lydia nodded fervently. I swear I haven't lied. Wolfe studied her long enough to identify her ancestral lineage. Finally he reached toward the bell cord, but thought better of it. Not yet. Archie, he said, you may draft a retainer agreement. I arched a brow. So you're sold? He glared. I am not sold. I am intrigued. Miss Shaw exhaled shakily, relief flooding her expression. But, Wolfe continued, I will not commence until terms are settled. Miss Shaw, the fee is... The number he quoted made her eyes widen, but she didn't flinch beyond that. I'll pay, she whispered. Just find her. Wolfe inclined his head minutely. Good. Her shoulders sagged. She wasn't safe, not by a mile, but she had someone in her corner. Archie, Wolfe said, take Miss Shaw to the front room. She should compose herself before she departs. I nodded and stepped toward her. She rose unsteadily. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe nodded once. We shall see. As I escorted her out, Wolfe finally pulled the bell cord. Fritz appeared in the doorway, wearing his usual mild but alert expression. Fritz, Wolfe said, dinner. Fritz bowed and vanished. I lingered in the doorway long enough to catch Wolfe's face soften, just slightly, as he gazed at the torn silk ticket lying on his desk, like an accusation from the city outside. He was hooked, and that meant so was I. The rain had the streets pinned down like a bad-tempered cop working overtime when I stepped out of the brownstone with my hat tipped low and my collar pulled up. Manhattan was doing its usual impression of a wet dog shaking itself all over civilization, and I had the privilege of walking through it. Lydia Shaw had given us a scare big enough to stir Wolfe's curiosity, which meant I was the one who got soaked while he contemplated crime from a dry leather throne. It's a division of labour I've grown accustomed to, though I'd be perfectly willing to renegotiate my half. Neon lights sputtered on 35th Street, blinking reflections across puddles like someone had scattered handfuls of cheap jewels across the cement. The wind shoved me once or twice for sport. I ignored it and made for the Satin Crown, the kind of nightclub where the lighting was low, the drinks were ambitious, and nobody told the truth unless their life depended on it. And even then, only after negotiation. The doorman was a slab of gristle in a wool coat. His hat brim shadowed his eyes, but not enough to hide the fact he didn't like strangers. I stepped under the awning, flicked some rain off my sleeve, and gave him a nod. Evening, I said. I'm looking for a friend. That's so, he replied, voice grinding like a taxi transmission that needed mercy. Most people are. Mine's specific, I said. Hat check girl, name of Shaw. He blinked once. Don't know her. The problem with professional liars is that the really good ones don't blink at all. His blink told me he knew exactly who I meant. Before I could needle him more, the front doors swung open and Pearlie Stebbins stepped out. He looked just as surprised to see me as I was delighted to see him. He had a cigar clamped in the side of his mouth like it was afraid to fall. Well, well, Pearlie said, if it ain't the orchid watering brigade. Evening, Pearlie, I said cheerfully. Looking for a date? His scowl deepened. You're hilarious. You working a case or looking to ruin my night? Little of column A, little of column B, I said. I thought maybe you could help me with a missing girl. Pearlie shifted his weight, eyeing me. Don't tell me Wolfe's got his mitts on this one. The client came to us, I said. We're not recruiting from the gutters. Pearlie grunted. Funny. I heard a girl did go missing. Hat check dancer, something like that. But I got nothing solid. Word is she left after some backstage delivery and didn't clock out. Could be she skipped town. Or someone helped her skip, I said. Pearlie didn't answer. He looked like he had more to say, but decided silence was safer. He tipped his hat and moved off down the sidewalk, shoulders hunched against the rain. Inside the satin crown, the heat hit like a velvet slap. Cigarette smoke curled through the air, thick enough to paddle through. Brass railings gleamed under red lamps, and the whole joint pulsed with the kind of low-key danger Wolfe claims he's allergic to. Waitresses darted between tables carrying trays that held more lies than liquor, and the band crooned something smoky enough to set off fire alarms. I flashed a friendly look at the first waiter who drifted too close. He was rail-thin, jittery, the type who gets nervous crossing carpet without official permission. Evening, I said. I'm looking for a girl. He nearly dropped his tray. I don't know anything. I didn't say anything yet, I replied, but since you're volunteering, hat check girl, pretty, nervous, worked here until she didn't. He backed up like he expected me to sprout horns. I can't talk about staff. Management doesn't like it. Management won't like it even less if you talk to the wrong person, I said lightly. Lucky for you, I'm the right one. He glanced around, then leaned in just enough to share a secret without liking himself for it. She got an envelope a few nights ago. Blue, from a guy with a fancy ring. They argued. In the VIP alcove. Name? I don't know. Try again. He swallowed. They call him Kevil. Raymond Kevil. Wall Street type. He's got friends. And muscle. The waiter nodded vigorously. You bet. Before I could press further, he scurried away, nearly knocking over a cigarette girl in a sequined outfit whose tray sparkled with silver lighters and menthol dreams. She shot him a dirty look before turning her charm back on me. Looking for a smoke, honey? Information, I said. But if you throw in a smile, I won't complain. She smirked. I remember your girl, the hat check one. Real quiet. Real pretty. She got something the other night. A blue envelope. Looked scared after. Did she leave with someone? No, but she went backstage. Didn't come back. Her eyes flicked toward the corridor behind the stage curtain, where two broad shoulders stood watch like twin gargoyles. That told me enough. I wandered toward the VIP alcove for a look around. The lighting there was even dimmer, and the seats were plush enough to swallow you whole. The smell of expensive booze tangled with cologne that cost more than my rent. That's where high rollers whispered things they didn't want their wives or the newspapers to hear. A pair of bodyguards blocked the farther end of the alcove, one on each side of the curtain. Their poker faces were so good they made me suspicious of the cards. Gentlemen, I said, I'm here to see Mr. Kevil. Not available, one of them grunted. Maybe he's expecting me, I suggested. He ain't, the other replied. You checked? That's thorough. They didn't appreciate my humour. One of them took half a step forward, and I decided that was close enough. Their shoulders alone suggested they'd majored in removing unwanted guests with a minor in stacking bodies neatly. All right, I said amiably. Tell him a friend came calling. We don't take messages. Terrific customer service, I said. I'll be sure to mention it in my review. I left before one of them decided to test his knuckles against my ribcage. Sometimes discretion is the better part of continuing to breathe. Back outside, the rain hadn't improved its personality. It greeted me with a slap of cold water that ran down my collar like an uninvited guest. I walked the long block toward the brownstone, neon reflections pooling in the street like bruised colours. By the time I reached home, it was 10:47. I shook myself off in the vestibule, hung up my coat, and stepped into Wolfe's office. The big man was finishing a chilled bottle of beer, holding it between two fingers as if the glass might shatter if gripped too firmly. He glanced at the clock. "You are late." "The rain slowed me," I said. "I am acquainted with meteorological conditions," Wolfe replied. "Report." I gave him the full rundown: the waiter, the cigarette girl, the sapphire ring, and Raymond Kevill's bodyguards making human bookends in the VIP alcove. Wolfe's brow sank lower with every detail. "A Wall Street fixer," he murmured. "Phooey. I detest dealing with men whose wealth exceeds their wisdom." "That's most of Wall Street," I said. "But this Kevill has a habit of arguing with hat-check girls before they disappear. Seems like a productive avenue." His gaze cut to me sharply. "You provoked Stebbins." I said hello. "You antagonized him." "It builds character." Wolfe growled softly. "Archie, do not be reckless. Inspector Stebbins, though obstinate, is not your adversary unless you force the matter. He knows I'm harmless." "Your tongue is not," Wolfe said. "If you provoke tension with the police while I engage in a delicate inquiry, I shall be most displeased." That was Wolfe for, "I worry you'll get yourself clubbed by a man with a badge." It warmed the heart in a prickly sort of way. "Fine," I said. "I'll behave." "I doubt it," he muttered, but there was fondness in it. "Nevertheless, sit. We must consider Mr. Kevill." I pulled out my notebook and flipped it open. "The waiter says Kevill argued with her. A blue envelope was involved, and she went backstage. Didn't return." Wolfe nodded once. "We must discover the contents of that envelope." "That'll be a trick," I said. "Her room's clean, the club's tight, and Kevill's men don't believe in guest passes." Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared in the doorway like he'd been summoned from the ether. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "another beer." Fritz nodded, vanished, and returned with a glorious frosted glass and bottle. Wolfe took them with the gravitas of a king receiving tribute. "Archie," Wolfe said after a sip, "you are to return tomorrow and speak with Mr. Kevill directly. I want you to ascertain his business with the girl." "If his bodyguards let me." "If they do not," Wolfe said dryly, "exercise discretion. I require your continued existence." "That's sweet," I said. "It is practical," Wolfe corrected. He lifted the beer again, dismissing me with a small wave. I stood, slid my notebook into my jacket, and headed toward the hall. The rain outside still whispered promises of misery, but at least I wasn't facing it tonight. Behind me, Wolfe muttered, "A Wall Street fixer. Phooey." And that was his version of tucking me in. If there's one thing I've learned in my line of work, it's that when a man insists on coming to the brownstone wearing a sapphire ring big enough to signal ships at sea, he's either guilty of something or trying very hard to look like he isn't. When Raymond Kevill stepped through our front door that afternoon, I got the impression he was both. The clock on Wolfe's desk read 3:41 p.m., dangerously close to orchid hours, so Wolfe was already perched in his chair like a man guarding the last square of territory he intended to die on. Theodore Horstman was upstairs among the orchids, no doubt whispering encouraging things to them, and Wolfe had the kind of tension he only displayed when business intruded on plant time. I didn't blame him. If I had a personal cloud forest, I'd grow fangs to protect it. I'd invited Kevill as requested, but I didn't need more than 2 seconds of looking at him to know I didn't like him. His tailored suit was charcoal with subtle pinstripes, his hair slicked with an excess of confidence, and his smile pre-polished for boardrooms. When the door shut behind him, he looked around the office with a proprietary air, like he already owned the mortgage. "So, this is the place," he said, strolling in as if auditioning for a role. "Detective Paradise." "It's paradise if you're paying," I said. "Otherwise it's just an office." He chuckled. "Good line, Mr. Goodwin." "It's not a line," I said. "More like a public service announcement." Wolfe cut in without rising or softening. "Mr. Kevill, sit." Kevill obeyed, but not before taking his time about it. He chose the red armchair with the ease of a man who believed all furniture was designed specifically for his convenience. The sapphire on his right hand caught the light from the lamp and threw it back at us like it suspected we were eavesdropping. "Mr. Wolfe," he said pleasantly, "I understand you have questions about a girl from the Satin Crown." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, which was his version of counting to 10. "I have no questions. My assistant may." He shifted his gaze to me. "Proceed." That was Wolfe's way of saying, "You deal with this clown, Archie, because if I speak for too long, I will tell him exactly what I think of his face." I cleared my throat. "Your name has come up in regard to a hat-check girl who disappeared. 2 nights ago, you allegedly gave her a blue envelope. She hasn't been seen since." Kevel smiled like he was indulging a child. "Nightclub gossip, Mr. Goodwin. Those girls thrive on fantasy." I didn't appreciate being called a fantasist by someone whose suit probably cost the same as my monthly salary. "Funny thing," I said. "The fantasy seems to be circulating among waiters, cigarette girls, and doormen, and none of them strike me as imaginative types." Kevel shrugged one shoulder, emotion crafted to seem worldly. "Backroom economy. People exaggerate to make their lives feel bigger." Wolfe's eyes opened. "Did you give Miss Shaw an envelope?" Kevel paused. The smile faltered for half a second, the kind of moment detectives spend whole careers waiting for. Then he recovered. "I give envelopes to many people, Mr. Wolfe. Business, charitable donations, small efforts to improve society. That club has people who run errands, harmless tasks." "Errands," Wolfe repeated, tasting the word as if it were a dubious mushroom. "Messages," Kevel said smoothly. "Tips. Occasionally cash to be left for a business associate who happens to be backstage." "And what business requires anonymity through hat-check girls?" Wolfe asked. Kevel's smile widened. "The kind that stays profitable, Mr. Wolfe." I didn't like that answer. Not because it wasn't interesting, but because it was delivered with the swagger of a man who believed he was both charming and untouchable. I leaned forward. "Tell me something, Mr. Kevel. Why did someone spot you arguing with her?" Loudly. He lifted his ringed hand and examined the sapphire. "Arguing? I doubt that. I may have spoken sternly. She misplaced something." "Something?" I asked. "A minor item." Wolfe's eyebrow lifted. That was equivalent to a bark from a wolfhound. "What item?" Wolfe pressed. Kevel's expression cooled. "I'm afraid that's confidential." "Your confidentiality," Wolfe replied, "is not my concern. My client's missing sister is." Kevel tilted his head. "Your client?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "That implies a retainer, Mr. Kevel, a legal and financial commitment which I take very seriously." Kevel's smile disappeared entirely. "I didn't realize I'd walked into a courtroom." "You haven't," Wolfe said dryly. "If you had, I would be standing." That earned a snort from me. Kevel ignored it. "Look," Kevel said, spreading his hands. "If the girl's gone, she ran off on her own. These nightclub types do that. They get bored. They get adventurous." That statement set my teeth on edge. "You sound like you've lost a few before." Kevel didn't like that. The temperature in the room dropped by 3 degrees. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, voice smooth but with an undertone of warning, "maintain decorum." That was Wolfe defending me and chastising me in the same breath, a rare dual achievement. Kevel probably thought Wolfe was simply keeping order, but I knew Wolfe well enough to catch the note of protectiveness. He didn't want Kevel's temper flaring in my direction. Kevel stood abruptly. "I don't see why I came here. You people want a scandal to feast on." Wolfe's voice hardened. "I want the girl found." Kevel adjusted his cufflinks, then looked somewhere besides me. He turned, making for the door. I walked him out, because I didn't trust him not to pocket something expensive on his way. When I reached the vestibule behind him, a small piece of silk fluttered from the hem of his overcoat to the floor, quiet as a whisper. It was a torn silk ticket. My pulse hitched a gear. I bent down, picked it up with 2 fingers and held it to the light. It matched Lydia Shaw's. Kevel hadn't noticed, or pretended not to. "What's that?" he asked. "Litter," I said calmly. I bent as if to tuck it back into his pocket, but slipped it into my own instead and brushed an imaginary speck off his coat. "Wouldn't want you getting fined." He made a noise halfway between annoyance and condescension, then stepped out into the drizzle and strode down the sidewalk like a man who believed the weather owed him respect. I closed the door, went back to the office, and ran the ticket through our photostat before Wolfe even asked. When the copy slid out, I laid it on his desk. Wolfe eyed it, fingers steepled. "A second ticket," he murmured, "from Mr. Kevel's coat." "Yep," I said, and he didn't blink. Wolfe lifted the silk edge with disdain, as though it were a dead insect. This supports the conjecture that Miss Shaw handled something valuable, or dangerous. Or both, I said. And Kevel knows exactly what. Wolfe rolled his eyes upward, his version of deep contemplation. Mr. Goodwin, however disagreeable Mr. Kevel may be, you must not provoke him unnecessarily. He is accustomed to power, and such men hire their violence. He won't scare me, I said. He should, Wolfe replied. Your durability is admirable but finite. Thanks, I said, I think. He ignored that. Under no circumstances are you to engage with his bodyguards without cause. I plan to provoke them only in emergencies. That is not funny, Wolfe snapped. It wasn't, I admitted, but it was accurate. Wolfe inhaled through his nose. Confounded Archie. Exercise prudence. There it was again, that flicker of concern wrapped in irritation. Wolfe's way of saying he needed me alive, not decorated on a coroner's table. I tucked the photostat into my file folder. So, what's next? Next, Wolfe said, I go to the orchids. That wasn't a dismissal. It was a ritual. The daily pilgrimage kept him sane, or as close as he ever got. He rose with monumental reluctance, crossed the room, and stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut with the finality of a judge's gavel. Left alone, I looked down at the photostat of the second ticket. 2 torn silks, 2 clues pointing at Kevel. A man with a sapphire ring whose lies sparkled nearly as brightly. A man who'd just walked out of our brownstone with more answers than he'd admitted. And I had the sinking feeling we'd need to shake that sapphire tree harder before the truth dropped. Because if Kevel wasn't scared yet, he soon would be. The phone dragged me out of sleep at 6:12 a.m., a time of day I normally avoid on principle, and Wolfe avoids because he considers dawn a personal insult. I groped for the receiver with the coordination of a drunk octopus and managed a civilized yeah instead of what I felt. A thin, frantic voice crackled through the line. This is the Satin Crown. You were asking about one of our girls. You'd better get down here. There's a body. That woke me up faster than a bucket of ice water. Whose? I don't know. Staff back room. Just get here. The line died, leaving me staring at the receiver like it had committed a felony. Fritz was barely awake when I stumbled into the hallway, shrugging into my coat. Is Mr. Wolfe? Still asleep, I said. Do him a favour and keep it that way until I get back. Of course. Fritz's voice was soft, controlled. Be careful, Mr. Archie. Careful is always a relative term in my line of work, but I appreciated the sentiment. The Satin Crown looked worse at dawn than it did under neon lights. The rain had softened into a grey mist hanging like old cigarette smoke over the street. A small huddle of employees stood outside the stage entrance, faces pale and pinched, the way people look when they've seen something they hope never to see again, but know will visit their dreams anyway. Pearly Stebbins met me just inside the door. He looked like he'd been awake for days. Same rumpled suit, same bulldog set of his jaw, same cigar clenched in death grip between his teeth. Only thing missing was a sign around his neck reading, "Don't irritate me unless you have a death wish." You again, he said. Figures. You love me, Pearly, I told him. If I didn't show up, you'd worry. I worry you'll contaminate a scene by standing too close to it. That's touching, I said. Where's the body? He jerked his thumb toward the backstage corridor. Follow me, and don't touch anything. Have I ever touched anything I shouldn't? Pearly gave me a look that answered the question thoroughly. We passed through the tangle of dressing rooms, prop closets, and narrow hallways that smelled of cheap perfume, stale smoke, and ambition. The back room sat at the end of a short corridor lined with posters for acts long since forgotten. Pearly pushed the door open with 2 fingers. The waiter lay sprawled on the floor, eyes glassy, mouth half open as if he'd died mid-confession. I recognized him. Nervous type, jittery voice, constantly glancing over his shoulder like the world was full of traps only he could see. He'd whispered too much to me 2 nights ago. Now he'd never whisper again. Kramer stood on the far side of the room, arms folded, cigar trapped between his teeth like it was the last good vice left on earth. His hat was crooked, his coat damp, and his face arranged into the expression he saved for mornings when the city decided to serve up corpses before breakfast. Goodwin, he said without looking at me. Of course. That's what everyone says, I replied. I should come with a warning label. You should come with a leash. He tapped ash into a nearby waste bin. Don't make this harder than it is. I stepped carefully across the room. I may be a wisecracker, but even I know how to avoid evidence like it's booby-trapped. The waiter's jacket was rumpled, one pocket turned out. A faint dusting of violet powder clung to the lining. "Recognize him?" Pearlie asked. "Yeah," I said. "He's the one who said Kevel argued with the girl." "That's so," Kramer murmured. "Funny how people who talk too much wind up quiet permanently." "I didn't kill him to protect my sources," I said. "That's Wolfe's line." Kramer gave a snort so tired it barely had energy to insult me. "Spare me. What did he tell you?" I recited every word exactly. Tone, phrasing, what he'd said about the envelope and the sapphire ring, the argument, the VIP alcove. Kramer listened, expression carved from stone. When I finished, he sighed. "You know," he said, "Wolfe usually smells things before we do." "That's because he never leaves his chair," I said. "People bring their sins to him like tribute." Kramer shifted, cracking his back. "I could drag you downtown for questioning." "And I'd be delighted to ride along," I said. "But Wolfe would send a polite note to the DA asking why you're wasting tax dollars." That earned me half an irritated grin. "All right, stay out of the way. Don't wander, don't touch, don't breathe unless necessary." "You cops and your affection," I said. "It's overwhelming." While the forensic boys took measurements and muttered into notebooks, I crouched near but not over the body. A folded sheet of paper peeked out from the man's inside pocket. I pointed at it. "May I?" Kramer grunted. "Fine. Don't smear prints." I lifted the edge with a pencil and unfolded it enough to read. A list. Coat check numbers, written in fast, uneven strokes. I scanned the sequence and felt a spark hit my spine. There it was, the same sequence stamped on Lydia's torn silk ticket. "Interesting," I said. "What?" Kramer demanded. "Just thinking out loud," I said lightly. "Sometimes noise helps me think." Kramer growled. "Archie, don't start." "Relax," I said. "I'm cooperating." "For once," he muttered. The door banged open and the cigarette girl from 2 nights earlier burst in, eyes wide and wild. "I told you," she cried. "I told you she wasn't dead." Pearlie stepped forward, hands raised. "Easy. Slow down." The girl pointed at me. You were asking about her. The hat check girl. You said she was missing." "That's right," I said gently. "You saw her." 2 nights ago," she gasped. "Here. Alive. She came through the backstage hall. She was crying." Pearlie exchanged a look with Kramer. "Not tonight?" I asked. "No," she said quickly. 2 nights ago. I didn't see her after that. But she was here, I swear." A red herring maybe, or maybe not. But the fear in her eyes wasn't fake. I've seen enough people lying to know what truth looks like when it's terrified. Kramer scribbled something in his notebook and jerked his head toward the hallway. "Stebbins, get her statement." Pearlie nodded and led her out. The moment the door closed, Kramer turned back to me. "You give Wolfe a message," he said. "Tell him not to get cute. If he knows anything, I want to hear it before it winds up in the Gazette or on your boss's dinner menu." "If Wolfe ever tried to season a meal with evidence," I said, "Fritz would strangle him." "Go," Kramer said, rubbing his face, "before I remember why I don't like you." "That's the nicest thing you've said to me before 7 a.m. "Out," he growled. I left. Back at the brownstone, the office smelled faintly of coffee, orchids, and Wolfe's disapproval. The elevator hummed as he descended from the plant rooms, and when the doors slid open, he stepped out with the grace of a man whose peace had been disturbed by something uncivilized, like death or my early morning report. He sat, steepled his fingers, and waited. I gave it to him straight. Dead waiter, violet powder, coat check numbers, the cigarette girl's story. Wolfe absorbed every detail like a blotter. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "There is a deception." "Yeah," I said. "Someone's lying." He closed his eyes. "Summon Miss Lydia Shaw." I phoned her, and she arrived 20 minutes later, pale and wringing her hands. Wolfe watched her enter with such immobility you'd think he'd been carved there. "Miss Shaw," he began, "your sister was not a passive victim. She was engaged." Lydia swallowed. "Engaged in what?" "Blackmail," Wolfe said. She flinched as if struck. "No." "Yes," Wolfe said coldly. "You will tell the truth now, or I will drop you from this house like refuse." Her eyes filled, then steadied. She was blackmailing someone, at the club, but she said it wasn't her idea. They made her do it first. and when she tried to stop, they threatened her. Names, Wolfe said. I don't know. Wolfe opened one eye. Pfui, the oldest vice in the theatre of men. Lydia began to cry softly. Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz appeared instantly, expression calm but concerned. Fritz, Wolfe said, bring Miss Shaw tea, something soothing. His tone was gruff, but even Lydia saw the mercy in it. I leaned against Wolfe's desk. So what now? Wolfe glared at me. Now, Archie, you work, and you do not get yourself killed. That wasn't on my agenda, I said. Your agenda, Wolfe replied, is alarmingly flexible. And with that, he dismissed both of us. Ritual complete, tension rising, mystery deepening. The rooming house on West 46th looked like it had quit caring how it stacked up against the rest of Manhattan and settled for staying upright. The brick was the colour of old coffee. The stoop was chipped at the edges, and the buzzer panel in the vestibule had more blank slots than names. It was the kind of address you used when you wanted the city to forget you existed, or when you hadn't quite decided you existed yourself. At 9:47 that morning, I rang the bell and waited while somebody upstairs argued with the idea of being vertical. A chain rattled, a bolt slid, and the door opened 3 inches on a thin woman in a flowered housecoat that had survived too many washings and none of the years. Yes? She demanded. Good morning, I said. I'm Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into the whereabouts of one of your tenants, Miss Shaw, the younger one. Her eyes took me in like I was a bill with no return address. You a cop? Private, I told her. I work for Nero Wolfe. That did it. People who read the Gazette react to Wolfe the way parish ladies react to thunder, warily, but with interest. She eased the door open another few inches. I seen his name, she said. Always trouble around it. He doesn't hoard it, I said. May I come in and admire the wallpaper? That was meant to be a joke. The wallpaper in the vestibule had died sometime around 1918. She sniffed. She's not here, she said. Been gone a few days now. I told the sister, Lydia. I said your hat check girl probably ran off with some fella and forgot to send regrets. Red herring number 1, the romantic elopement. Landlady's favourite because it doesn't involve policemen or reporters. Maybe, I allowed. Until we know, I'd like to see what she left behind. It might soothe her sister. Reluctance fought with curiosity and lost. 3rd floor rear, she said. If you break anything, I'll add it to the rent. The 3rd floor hallway smelled of cabbage, coal dust, and somebody's overconfident hair tonic. The door to the rear room was half shut. I knocked once, waited, then pushed it open. The room was small but neat. The bed was made, the curtains drawn halfway against a washed-out morning, and the dresser carried the usual collection of bottles and compacts. On a chair by the window sat a half-packed suitcase, lid up like a mouth waiting for the next smart remark. Blouses folded on one side. On the other, a pair of worn dancing shoes and a rolled silk scarf. You don't half-pack a suitcase for romance. You finish it, or you don't start. On the dresser lay a square of blotting paper, edges still faintly damp. I picked it up by a corner and took a sniff. Violets. The same scent that had clung to the torn silk ticket in Lydia's handbag and to the dead waiter's pocket. Apparently the scent concession at the Satin Crown was doing brisk business with the underworld. Beside the blotter lay an empty envelope, torn open down one side as if somebody had been in a hurry. The upper left corner carried the neat blue imprint of a Wall Street brokerage firm, one of those dignified outfits whose ads Wolfe sometimes snorted at while reading the financial pages. No address, no note, nothing inside. Just the watermark and the suggestion that something had travelled from mahogany desks to a hat-check girl's dresser. I slid the envelope into a large manila folder I'd brought for souvenirs of that kind and wrote the brokerage name in my notebook, underlining it twice. If a brokerage was sending gifts to a nightclub worker, it wasn't investment advice. A floorboard complained behind me. I turned. A young man filled the doorway, hat in his hands, shoulders hunched as if he were afraid of disturbing the furniture. The suit was brown and modest. The eyes behind it weren't. You're not supposed to be in here, he said. He tried for firm and landed somewhere around anxious. True, I agreed. But ever since she stopped answering the phone, we've been improvising. You connected to the premises or just casing them for the competition? He flushed. I live across the hall, Gerald Pike. Archie Goodwin, I said. I work for Wolfe. His eyebrows jumped. The detective. We don't use the word out loud in polite neighbourhoods, I said. Lucky for us, this isn't one. Come in, Mr. Pike. You knew Miss Shaw's sister? He stepped in and closed the door gently, like he was afraid noise might scare her back into the room. His gaze went straight to the half-packed suitcase and stayed there. She wouldn't just go, he muttered. Not like that. So, you're not sold on Mrs. Haley's theory that she ran off with a wealthy stranger, I said. Personally, I thought it needed a rewrite. His hands tightened on the hat. She talked about leaving in a big way, sure. Everybody here does. But she'd have told Lydia. She'd have told me. The last word slipped out before he could catch it. Devotion has a sound. I've heard it in better suits. Sit down, I suggested, nodding at the chair. Tell me about the man she didn't want to tell you about. He hesitated, then sat. I don't know his name. He came into the club. Better clothes than the other men. He had this ring, big stone, blue, like he wanted everyone to notice. She said he sent her on errands. Envelopes to take backstage, money to pass along. She said it was harmless. People always do, I said, right up until it isn't. Did she say what was in the envelopes? No. He glanced at the dresser. Once she told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should burn something she'd hidden. I told her she'd been reading too many paperbacks. Some of them are educational, I said. What did she hide? His eyes flicked toward the second drawer. I went over, opened it, and found a flat cardboard box under a folded cardigan. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. It was a list, dates down one side, amounts on the other. Her hand, quick and a little uneven. Every few entries had a tiny symbol after it, a star, a loop like a ring. The last date matched the night she vanished. That one had 2 marks. She dropped that once, Pike said quietly. In the hall. I picked it up. I work where there's a photostat machine, so I made a copy in case she lost it. She laughed, said I took her life more seriously than she did. Good habit, I told him. You still have the copy? He nodded. In my room. Then go get it, I said. And don't let Mrs. Haley see you running. She'll think you're avoiding rent. He was back in less than a minute with a folded page from his pocket. It matched the original exactly, right down to the shaky numbers on the last line. I slid the photostat into my folder and put the original back into the box. Kramer gets testy when civilians walk around with original records. I try not to raise his blood pressure before lunch. Did she ever say who signed the paychecks? I asked. No names, he said. Just hints. She said one of them wore suits that didn't come off a rack, and his hands were too soft for the work he was in. The other one, she wouldn't describe him. She said he made her feel cold just thinking about him. 2 men, I said. Same girl, same list. Blackmail, not charity. He swallowed. She said it started because they made her do it. That if she stopped, something would happen to Lydia. I thought she was exaggerating. She liked to pretend her life was a story. Sometimes it is, I said. You ever hear her talk about leaving town with anyone? Musician, waiter, customer with big promises? No, he said quickly. She wanted out, but on her own terms. She talked about a small shop, maybe a dress place. She said she'd had enough of men deciding things for her. Then if someone tells me she ran off for romance, I said, what do I relay on your behalf? He looked at the suitcase again. Tell them they're fools, he said. I believed him. Sometimes you just do. We left the room together. I locked the door, gave the key back to Mrs. Haley with a line about Lydia needing it intact, and headed downtown with my folder thicker and my opinion of Wall Street slightly lower than usual. By 12:58 I was back at the brownstone. Fritz was carrying dishes into the dining room. The smell of braised veal met me in the hall like an old friend with expensive tastes. I went into the office. Wolfe was at his place at the table, napkin tucked, expression sour, which is his usual pre-lunch look. You cut that fine, he said. If the subway had run slower, I'd have eaten on my feet, I told him. You'd have survived. Report, he said, which was his idea of grace. I gave it to him between forkfuls, the rooming house, the half-packed suitcase, the violet blotter, the brokerage envelope, Gerald Pike and his photostat. Wolfe listened, chewing with concentration, and only glared once when my gesturing elbow came within range of the gravy boat. When I finished, he wiped his mouth and held out a hand. I passed him the copy. He read it, lips pursed. Regular intervals, he said. Some sufficient to tempt, not enough to satisfy. And 2 distinct marks. 2 paymasters, I said. She was double-dipping. He snorted. She turned her convenience to profit. Blackmail, the oldest fungus on the tree of human folly. Phooey. He tapped the last line. The final date corresponds with her disappearance. Busy evening for somebody, I said. Maybe for 2 somebodies. I got up and started pacing. It helps me think and annoys him, a combination I've always admired in an activity. Archie, he said sharply, sit down. Your prowling distracts me and offends Fritz, who laboured over this veal. Fritz can't see me, I pointed out, but I sat. So we've got one man in a good suit with a sapphire ring and another shadow who freezes the room, both paying through a girl who checks hats. And who attempted to play them against each other, Wolfe said. That complicates the choices available to anxious men. For her, sure, I said. What about for me? He glanced up. You will be cautious. You will not approach anyone connected with that brokerage without informing me first. You will not contrive private meetings with Mr. Keevill's hirelings in narrow alleys. I have no intention of losing you to someone else's panic. Touched, I said. I always hoped I'd be missed. You would be inconvenient to replace, he replied, and I have become accustomed to your noise. That was warm for him. I grinned. All right, I'll try not to get murdered until after dessert. He closed his eyes briefly, either in prayer or exasperation. Fritz came in with coffee. Wolfe folded the photostat, slid it into a drawer, and picked up his cup. Very well, he said. This afternoon you will begin tracing that brokerage. Somewhere in their circle there is a man who smells of violets and uses a nightclub corridor as a safe deposit box. And when we find him? I asked. Wolfe took a sip and let his eyelids droop. Then, Archie, we shall see how many men thought one girl on 35th Street could be used and forgotten. That was as close to a vow as he ever got, and it was enough to make the veal taste even better. If there's one thing that can sour a man's morning faster than burnt coffee, it's opening your eyes to the sound of the telephone breathing in your ear before you've had a chance to greet the day with any of the proper courtesies, like remaining horizontal. The next morning at 9:03 a.m., the phone on my nightstand erupted like it owed me money. I rolled over, grabbed the receiver, and muttered a word not approved by the New York Board of Respectable Vocabulary. Goodwin, I croaked. Archie, Lon Cohen said, sounding far too awake. You sitting down? I'm lying down, I said. My body hasn't reached the upright stage. Well, brace yourself anyway. The Gazette is running a front-page piece this morning, and your boss isn't going to like it. Which piece? I asked. The ones you tell me about, or the ones you help write? Don't get cute, Lon snapped. You know I keep Wolfe out of the line of fire when I can. But this came from higher up. Some editor's wet dream about Wolfe interfering with an ongoing, sensitive police matter involving a missing girl. The article says Wolfe's withholding information. And the letters, Archie, the letters, half the readership thinks Wolfe's some kind of obstructionist sphinx who needs a subpoena just to exhale. That woke me up properly. Let me guess. They printed a silhouette and called him a menace to public safety. Worse, Lon groaned. They printed a cartoon, Wolfe sitting on a pile of orchids while Kramer beats on the door with a warrant. I couldn't help it, I laughed. He'll love that. He's always wanted artistic recognition. Archie, Lon said urgently, fix this. Get him to talk to the police, before my bosses print him in a tutu next. If that happens, I said, I'll frame it. Lon hung up with a noise that suggested he regretted speaking to me at all. By 10:17 I was downstairs with a cup of coffee, bracing myself for Wolfe's morning mood. He was in the office, settled into his chair with a dictionary open to a page he was glaring at like it had personally insulted him. Judging by the tension in his shoulders, he already knew. The Gazette lay open on his desk, in full colour. I approached cautiously. Morning, sir? He didn't look up. Archie, if I ever discover who illustrated this monstrosity, I shall dedicate a portion of my remaining years to his ruin. I eyed the cartoon. It was a surprisingly flattering rendition of Wolfe, if you overlooked the enormous orchid throne and a speech balloon reading, I will not cooperate unless bribed with beef. It's charming, I said. It gives you range, humanity, whimsy. His head snapped up, eyes blazing. Whimsy? Are you deranged? This is an affront. It might help the public warm to you, I offered. People love a man with a hobby. Phooey, he spat. People love imbecilities. He stabbed a finger at the editorial column. Accuse me of interfering with police investigations, of withholding evidence. I do no such thing. You will call Inspector Kramer immediately. Already ahead of you, I said. I asked him to stop by. Wolfe stared. You invited him here? Yes. Voluntarily? Yes. Archie, he said slowly, I am beginning to fear you have inhaled something noxious. Before I could defend my decision, the doorbell rang. Fritz, not answering the door, never that, appeared in the office doorway. Mr. Kramer is here. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. Send him in. Kramer entered the room with the energy of a man who hadn't slept, hadn't liked being awake, and hadn't enjoyed anything that had happened in between. His coat was wrinkled, his tie crooked, and his cigar looked as though it had been chewed instead of smoked. Wolfe, he grunted. Inspector, Wolfe replied. They eyed each other like two generals forced to share a foxhole. I didn't leak that story, Kramer said before Wolfe could utter a syllable. I don't like reporters sniffing where they shouldn't, and I don't like my name printed next to the word bungled. Wolfe inclined his head, a small, formal gesture, but for Wolfe it was as good as laying down flowers. I accept that. Kramer blinked. You do? Yes. Well, Kramer said, clearly thrown. Good. He rubbed his jaw. Look, Wolfe, I'm tired. I've got a dead waiter, a missing girl, 24 leads, and a captain breathing down my neck. I don't want war with you, just cooperation. You have it, Wolfe said, if I receive it in kind. Kramer hesitated, then nodded. Fair. They weren't embracing, but in the world of Nero Wolfe and Inspector Kramer, that exchange was practically a honeymoon dance. I sat down and crossed my legs. Speaking of cooperation, what brings you here besides our charming portrait in the Gazette? Kramer pulled a folded document from his coat. Lab report. Thought you'd want to see it. Wolfe extended his hand. Kramer passed it over like it was radioactive. I leaned in as Wolfe unfolded it. The police lab had analysed the violet powder found on the waiter's jacket and the 2 silk tickets. It's a theatrical scent, Kramer said. Not the cheap kind the cigarette girls use. This is specialty stuff, imported. Only the dancers in the VIP rooms use it, the ones the public doesn't see. Ah, Wolfe murmured. Restricted access, elevated clientele. Significant. Kramer continued. Means your missing girl, Lydia's sister, had business where she wasn't supposed to. Someone let her back there. Someone with clout. That's one word for it, I said. Another is stupidity. Kramer shot me a glare. Goodwin, don't push it. I grinned. Relax. If you'd worn some of that violet scent, maybe you'd have an easier time charming sources. The room froze. Kramer's face twitched. He opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered, You're lucky you're not worth the paperwork, and let it slide. That was respect, in Kramer dialect. Wolfe folded the report with clinical precision. Inspector, this is useful, thank you. Kramer nodded once. Just keep me in the loop, and don't make me drag information out of you. Archie will keep you apprised when necessary, Wolfe said. Better be, Kramer growled. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report. He left without slamming the door, which was the Kramer equivalent of sending flowers. When the brownstone was quiet again, Wolfe leaned back, fingertips pressed together like he was communing with ancient spirits. Archie, he said, the Gazette's slander is offensive, but it is inconsequential to the more pressing matter. Which is? He tapped the folded report. The girl was not merely taking assignments from Mr. Kevill. She was in the private rooms. She had access that ordinary staff do not. Maybe Kevill gave it to her, I said. No, Wolfe said. Mr. Kevill's arrogance would prevent subtlety. He would not permit a servant to roam where he himself might be compromised. If she was in those rooms, it was because someone above Kevill placed her there. Above, I repeated. He seemed pretty high on the food chain. Then imagine a man who finds Kevill tractable, Wolfe said. One who uses him, perhaps as a channel, a conduit. I whistled softly. A man who protects himself by using Kevill to pass messages and money. Yes, Wolfe said. A man who might kill to silence both. A chill ran down my spine. So the blackmail target isn't Kevill? No, Wolfe said. Kevill is merely an errand boy in a better suit. He reached for the bell cord, pulled it, and waited. Fritz appeared with the speed of a well-trained reflex. Yes, sir? Beer, Wolfe said, and a napkin. Fritz vanished. Wolfe sighed heavily. Archie, this furor in the newspapers is intolerable, but if it galvanizes action, perhaps it is not wholly without benefit. That's the spirit, I said. Next week you'll be giving interviews. He gave me a stare that could peel varnish. Archie, he said, please refrain from encouraging idiocy, mine or others. Well, I said lightly, if the Gazette runs another cartoon, at least ask them to draw your good side. My good side, Wolfe said flatly, is currently engaged in not dismissing you. I grinned. That sounds like affection. It is indigestion, Wolfe retorted, from the news. Fritz arrived with the beer. Wolfe took the chilled glass and sipped with a sigh that sounded like a man briefly forgetting crime existed. Very well, he said, lifting his chin. We now pursue the man above Kevel. Any guess who he is? Not yet, Wolfe said. But we shall. He closed his eyes, leaning back, which was the signal that for now this battle was adjourned, and that the next one would be worse. The call came at 5:26 p.m., just as I was deciding whether to risk a glass of milk before dinner or behave like a civilized man and wait for Fritz's menu. The phone jangled with a kind of grim authority, and when I picked it up, Inspector Kramer didn't bother with greetings. Goodwin, get to 70th and Madison, he barked. Penthouse 19A, bring your eyes and your brain, we've got a situation. Am I invited? I asked, or summoned. Don't get smart, just come. And don't touch anything. The line died, leaving me with just enough dread to skip the milk altogether. Wolfe was upstairs among his orchids. Prime time, given that it was between 4 and 6. I left a note under his paperweight. Kramer, emergency, penthouse. Wolfe would see it the moment he descended, and probably curse the injustice of crime-disrupting botany. The doorman at 19A buzzed me up without enthusiasm. A uniform stood in the hall, jittery with tension. Inside the penthouse, the air felt thick and cold, like money that had been sitting still too long. Raymond Kevel lay on the polished marble floor of his living room, arranged almost neatly, like someone had considered staging the scene and then gotten bored. No bruises, no struggle, just dead. He looked smaller without the arrogance. The penthouse itself was a shrine to expensive taste. Black marble floors, white couches that begged for a disaster, abstract art that resembled psychological diagnoses, and a bar so well stocked it could supply an army with enough liquor to invade Connecticut. Kramer stood near the bar, his coat rumpled, his cigar smouldering like a guilty conscience. He didn't look at me at first. His gaze was fixed on something on the floor. When I reached him, he pointed with the end of the cigar. A tiny shard of sapphire gleamed against the marble like a teardrop from a very rich angel. That was in his ring, Kramer said tersely. Stone snapped clean out. I knelt, careful not to touch, and inspected it. Same ring he wore when he visited Wolfe, I said, big enough to blind taxi drivers. Now it's evidence, Kramer muttered, and I'm getting heat from all sides. He moved to the balcony doors. I followed. On the glass rail was a dusting of violet powder, faint but unmistakable. Well, I said, either he was meeting one of your private room dancers or the man's tastes were broader than advertised. Don't joke, Kramer snapped, though not as sharply as usual. I need Wolfe on this, without him leaving his damn chair. You've got me, I said. Buy one detective, get one genius free. He actually huffed a reluctant sound that might have been agreement. Come on, there's more. We stepped behind the bar. Kramer lifted the hinged counter flap and pointed at the lower shelves. One of the wood panels, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was slightly ajar. I crouched. A hidden compartment, about the length of a ledger and the depth of a man's secrets. Empty. Somebody cleaned him out, I said. Fast, Kramer agreed. No paper dust, no residue. They knew what they were after. And they wanted it gone before you got here. Kramer glared at me like it was my fault. Then his face relaxed. Barely. Goodwin, I don't think your girl did this. Lydia, no kidding. I mean her sister. Whoever she crossed, they're playing with stakes high enough to make Kevel nervous. And this, he gestured at the body with a slow, tired sweep, isn't a hat-check girl's handiwork. No blunt force, no panic, no mess. Someone walked in, did it clean, and walked out. That's comforting, I said. A tidy murderer. Goodwin, Kramer said, rubbing his forehead. I'm telling you because Wolfe listens to you, Keep him out of the press and keep him steady. I may need him, and I sure as hell don't want him turning this into one of his circus finales unless I'm ready for it. That was as close to a hug as Kramer ever got. I left the penthouse an hour later with a stomach full of unease and the faint scent of violet powder on my sleeve, an occupational hazard when every clue in this case came perfumed. Wolfe was back in the office when I returned a little after 7:22. His orchid time was interrupted, which put him in a mood typically reserved for broken beer bottles and incompetent assistants. When I walked in, he was sitting behind his desk with his eyes half closed, the way a lion looks at a gazelle deciding whether it's worth the energy. "You were gone too long," he said. "You'll live," I replied. "Keval won't." His eyes opened. "Explain." I did. Every detail, every angle, every clue. When I reached the part about the hidden compartment, Wolfe's brow tightened like a curtain drawing to a close. "And Inspector Kramer?" Wolfe asked. "He doesn't think Lydia's sister did it," I said. "He didn't say the words Goodwin. Maybe you and Wolfe aren't completely insufferable, but his tone aimed in that direction." Wolfe grunted. "Incredible." "I was shocked too," I said. "One day the man might even smile." "Archie," Wolfe said, "please. My constitution is not equal to such fantasies." I sat. "He wants your mind on it, without you leaving the chair." "As he should. And he wants the press off your back." "That," Wolfe said, "is wise." He closed his eyes again and pressed his fingertips together so tightly the knuckles paled. It was his deep thinking posture, the one that said he was constructing timelines in his head and placing suspects on them like chess pieces. 3 timelines, he murmured. The girl's last movements, Keval's final hours, the waiter's death. "And all 3 intersect at the same club," I said, "with violet powder sprinkled like breadcrumbs." He ignored that. "You will type these details into 3 separate memoranda, chronology only, no speculation." "Sure," I said. "Dinner's at 8. Want to bet you'll be hungry by then?" "No." "Want to bet you'll starve yourself in the name of intellectual purity?" He glared at me. "Archie, your wit is excessively caloric." "Then you should digest it slowly," I said. "Less indigestion." He breathed out through his nose, half exasperation, half something warmer. Wolfe's brand of affection always wore a disguise. "Go," he ordered. "Type." I stood, stretched my shoulders, and headed for the typewriter. As I reached the door, Wolfe called out without looking at me. "Archie?" "Yeah?" "Be cautious. Whoever killed Keval will not hesitate to kill again." That was as close to "be careful" as Nero Wolfe ever got. I nodded. "Sure thing, sir." And I went to type while Wolfe sat motionless, building theories like a man assembling an empire out of shadows. When Nero Wolfe decides to arrange the universe into neat rows, the universe usually gives up and lets him. At 9:14 the next morning, I walked into the office with a cup of coffee and found him already in his chair, yellow legal pad before him, fountain pen poised like a general's baton. The orchids had not yet summoned him, which meant his mind was hot enough to scorch fingerprints off a doorknob. "Archie," he said without preamble, "we are proceeding." "Proceeding where?" I asked. "Into chaos, because that's where all the suspects currently live." He raised a finger. "Order, Archie. I am imposing order." He tapped the pad. Columns of names marched across it. The individuals who traverse both spheres, finance and nocturnal entertainment, compose our suspect pool. "You make it sound glamorous," I said. "It's really just crooks in tuxedos passing envelopes to crooks in sequins." "Your metaphor," Wolfe replied, "is ungainly, but sufficient." He recited the names: nightclub managers, head shufflers, private room overseers, floor captains, investors who preferred darkness to daylight, and staff who drifted between tables like ghosts with tip jars. It was Manhattan's underrug society, where secrets changed hands faster than dance tickets. "Saul," Wolfe said, "will examine the connections between Keval's brokerage and the club's management." I nodded. Saul Panzer could find a black cat in a coal bin at midnight, blindfolded. "Fred Durkin," Wolfe continued, "shall concern himself with Gerald Pike. Something in that young man's demeanour is off." "You're telling me," I said. "He stammers like a priest at a poker table." "And Ori Cather," Wolfe said, "will pursue the girl's clandestine rendezvous. A woman who meets secretly in hotel rooms may have left a trail in hall registers, bellhop recollections, or telephone logs. Ori loves hotel work, I said. Too many mirrors for his ego to ignore. Wolfe glowered. Send for them all. I want 3 reports tonight. The send for them meant telephoning, which meant navigating Saul's glacial hellos, Fred's grumbling acceptance, and Ori's insufferably pleasant, "But of course, Archie." By 11, they were on the move. While they scattered, I typed Wolfe's memoranda in triplicate and pretended not to notice him watching me with that irritable fondness he deploys only when he forgets he has feelings. At 1 o'clock sharp, Fritz called us to lunch with his customary appearance at the doorway. We ate trout with lemon butter, and I gave Wolfe a running commentary on who might be lying, who might be panicking, and who might simply have the misfortune of bad posture. "You chatter," Wolfe said, "like a parrot whose tail is on fire." "It's called conversation," I said. "Some detectives use it to avoid going insane." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "Archie, if I relied upon your conversational aptitude for sanity, I would have perished long ago." Saul arrived first at 4:32, punctual as sunrise at equator latitudes. He removed his cap, sat without being asked, and produced a stack of notes. "I started with Kevil's brokerage files," Saul said. "Hard to reach. Someone fenced them off with procedural barbed wire. But—" Saul always had a but, and it was always worth money. "I found ledger summaries," he continued, "traced through 3 holding companies. Funds moved from Kevil's desk to a nightclub payroll operating under the manager's name. Beneath that, a discretionary fund labelled Private Retainer Operations. That's your laundromat." Wolfe nodded slowly. "Good." "Better," Saul added. He slid over a photostat. "This contract was filed 8 months ago. Kevil had a silent financial partner, 40% owner of the Satin Crown." I leaned over Wolfe's desk. The signature at the bottom belonged to Martin Delmar. I whistled. "I know that name. Suits so sharp you could cut cheese with them. He's supposed to be respectable." "He's supposed to keep his investments quiet," Saul corrected. Wolfe's eyebrow rose by an inch, the equivalent of a gasp in lesser mortals. "Thank you, Saul. You have earned your fee." Saul nodded, slid on his cap, and departed like a man evaporating. Ori Cather breezed in at 5:06, smelling faintly of hair cream and self-satisfaction. "You'll like this one," he said. "Our girl, the missing one, had a standing arrangement at the Belterre Hotel. Private suite, Tuesday nights, cash payment. No name on the registry, but I spoke to the bellhop." "And?" I asked. "She was escorted in once by a man in a camel coat," Ori said. "Older, polished, expensive cologne, not Kevil." "Describe him," Wolfe said crisply. "Tall, distinguished, grey at the temples, carried himself like he expected people to salute." I exchanged a look with Wolfe. "Delmar?" I asked. Ori snapped his fingers. "That's it, Delmar. I saw him once at a charity gala. Same attitude, same grooming. He's your guy." Wolfe pursed his lips. "Possibly." Ori preened. "I'll keep digging." "Do so," Wolfe said, "but do not alert him." Ori's grin dimmed slightly. "Of course not." He left with the air of a man who'd done great things and hoped the newspapers would report them. Fred Durkin showed up last, at 6:02, hat in hand, coat damp from a drizzle that had started with a whimper and turned into a tantrum. "I found something," he said, lowering his voice, "about Gerald Pike." "Tell us," Wolfe commanded. "He lied," Fred said simply. "Said he never followed Kevil, but a guy at a shoeshine stand on 49th remembered him. Said Pike hung around 3 days in a row, watching the building where Kevil's brokerage is." "Why?" I asked. Fred shrugged. "Said Pike was nervous, like he was waiting for someone to come out." Wolfe drummed his fingers. "Suspicious." "He didn't talk to nobody," Fred added. "Didn't approach Kevil, just watched and left." "That," Wolfe said, "is deeply suggestive." "Suggestive of what?" I asked. "He feared something," Wolfe said, "either for the girl or from her." I leaned back. "So our shy admirer is not so shy." Wolfe nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Durkin. Your vigilance is appreciated." Fred turned red with pride and lumbered out. When the office was empty again, Wolfe leaned back and exhaled a breath that made the curtains stir. "Archie," he said, "our pool of suspects has acquired density." "I'd say volume," I replied. At this rate, you'll need a bigger office. He shot me a withering look. The limitation is not spatial, Archie. It is auditory. Your conversational clutter subtracts from available air. Glad to contribute, I said. He ignored that. Now, the pattern. He lifted Saul's photostat. Keval was laundering money for Delmar, Wolfe said. The girl discovered it, perhaps by accident, perhaps by design. She blackmailed Keval, but Keval was not the primary target, Delmar was. And Delmar killed Keval to plug the leak, I asked. Not merely that, Wolfe said. He killed him because Keval faltered, because the girl threatened exposure from 2 directions. But why, I pressed, risk violence? Why not bribery or intimidation? Wolfe's voice softened by a fraction. Because fear, Archie, makes men abandon reason, and a man who trades information in dark corridors may believe murder is simply a sharper form of negotiation. He closed his eyes for a moment, a habit when he disliked the direction of human nature. Delmar, I said quietly, the polished businessman, the phantom partner, the man nobody suspects. Yes, Wolfe said, until now. He opened his eyes. The room felt charged like the air just before lightning. The girl, Wolfe added, is in grave danger if she lives, and Lydia, our client, may be next. There it was, the thread of protectiveness he rarely let slip. Wolfe's voice had a weight in it, an urgency that surprised even him. I stood. What now? Now, Wolfe said, you will call Inspector Kramer. Tell him we have a name. And dinner? I asked. It's almost 8. He waved a hand. Dinner will wait. That's alarming, I said. Should I alert the press? You should, Wolfe replied. Cease talking. Which, coming from Nero Wolfe, was practically a benediction. I've been in enough questionable buildings in Manhattan to recognize the smell of fear when it mixes with peeling paint and yesterday's cigarette ash. The Jazz boarding house on West 52nd was the sort of place where trumpets wailed at 3 in the afternoon, staircases shook from heavy footsteps, and the wallpaper had given up trying to hang on somewhere around the Hoover administration. At 6:17 p.m., I nudged open the front door with my shoulder and hoped the hinges wouldn't scream loud enough to summon whatever mood the house was in. If misery ever needed a mailing address, this place would take the job. I climbed 2 flights of stairs that slanted like a bad argument. The hallway light flickered with the kind of enthusiasm that made a man consider writing his will, and at the far end was room 6C, a door with swollen wood and metal numbers clinging by 1 nail. I knocked once. A voice inside, thin, breathy, whispered, "Go away." "Not my specialty," I said. "I'm Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. Your sister sent me." Silence, then a shuffle. Something pressed against the other side, a palm maybe, or sheer exhaustion. "Lydia?" I asked. "No," she whispered. "I'm her sister." The lock clicked. The door opened an inch, then 2. A pale face appeared, framed by tangled hair, cheeks hollowed out by a week of terror. She wasn't older than mid-20s, but fear had added a decade. "Miss Shaw," I said softly. "May I come in? You look like the wind might blow you into next Tuesday." She swallowed. "Did Delmar send you?" That name could make a priest shiver. "No," I said. "Delmar doesn't pay my salary, and if he tried, Wolfe would send the check back with a note correcting his grammar." A flicker of surprise crossed her expression. "Humour is good medicine if you apply the right dosage." She stepped back. I slipped inside. The room was small enough that if I stretched out both arms, I might be indicted for attempted expansion. The wallpaper was a pattern of green swirls that might once have been flowers before losing the will to live. I made a mental note. If the Manhattan police ever needed to arrest interior decoration for contributing to crime, this was Exhibit A. "You're safe," I said quietly, "for now." "No one's safe," she murmured. "Not when Delmar is involved." She sat on the edge of the bed, springs creaking under the weight of anxiety more than her body, and clutched a worn coat around herself. I pulled up a rickety stool and sat. "Start from the top. Everything you've been running from." Her eyes darted to the window as though expecting a shadow to detach from the fire escape. "Delmar used me," she said. "Not the way the girls talked about, not—" She broke off, shaking. "He used me as a courier." "For what?" I asked. "Payments, messages, blackmail." She swallowed. "I didn't know at first. They said I'd just be delivering envelopes. Nothing illegal, just investor correspondence." And you believed that? I asked gently. I was stupid, she whispered. No, I said. You were working. There's a difference. Her shoulders trembled. You started to catch on, I said. That's why Delmar panicked. The dancers in the private rooms, she said, nodding. Some of them owed money. Some were being paid for silence. Some, she closed her eyes, some were being used. Delmar told Keval to distribute the money, but he needed someone invisible to move between them without being noticed. And that was you, I said. She let out a laugh that cracked down the middle. I wasn't invisible. I just pretended to be. I heard things, saw things, I wrote it down. That, I said, was your second mistake. She nodded again. I realized I could skim, not much, just enough to buy Lydia a new coat, to try and get a better place. But when you skim from blackmailers, she let the sentence die a natural death. You overplayed your hand, I said. Yes, she whispered. Keval confronted me. He wasn't angry. He was scared. He said Delmar was unraveling, that the payments were getting sloppy, that someone was asking questions in the brokerage. And then, I asked, Delmar came to the club 2 nights ago. Her voice tightened. He told me he knew. He said if I disappeared quietly, Lydia would never be touched. If I stayed, he told me I wouldn't get the chance to confess. I leaned forward. So you ran. She nodded. I tried to burn the last payment envelope, but it wouldn't burn completely. She reached under the mattress and pulled out a crumpled, half-charred envelope. The Wall Street watermark glimmered faintly under soot smears. Inside were fragments of money, charred, warped, but still legible enough to prove origin and intent. Delmar tried to destroy this, she said. He didn't want anyone to know he paid me directly. Keval was the shield, but Keval lost his nerve. That's why Delmar killed him. I took the envelope carefully and slid it into my inside pocket. This stays between us, I said. No police, not yet. Her fingers clenched around the edge of the bed. What happens now? Now, I said, standing, you come with me. She jerked back. No, if Delmar finds me. He won't, I cut in, not where we're going. Her eyes widened. To Nero Wolfe? It's the safest fortress this side of West Point, I said, and the food's better. For the first time, a ghost of a smile flickered across her face. At 7:41 p.m., I ushered her into the brownstone through the side entrance. It wasn't strictly within protocol, but Wolfe could write volumes on the art of exceptions. Fritz materialized in the hallway like a Swiss apparition, eyes widening when he saw the girl. Please, I said, not a word. He nodded, solemn, trustworthy. Fritz could be trusted with the recipe for the universe. Wolfe was in his office, sitting behind his desk, with a book closed in front of him, as if he'd been waiting for a test he already knew the answers to. His gaze shifted from me to the girl. Miss Shaw, he said with grave gentleness, you are welcome here, you are safe. She stood stiffly, like a deer deciding whether the lion meant harm. Sit, he said. She sat. Archie, Wolfe said, secure the locks. I moved through the brownstone, turning deadbolts, sliding chains, securing windows, every ritual Wolfe employed when danger visited. When I returned, Wolfe was studying the girl with an expression somewhere between fury and compassion. Child, he said, you should have come at once. She blinked. I was afraid. Understandable, Wolfe said, but fear is a poor steward of strategy. She nodded, wringing her hands. Archie, Wolfe said. The envelope. I placed it on his desk. He examined it without touching the charred sections, leaning close enough that his lips tightened with a mix of satisfaction and disgust. This, he said, is motive and murder. The girl trembled. Wolfe saw it. You are protected, he said firmly. No harm will reach you under this roof. His tone was absolute, and it wasn't just for her, it was for me too. Wolfe's brand of protectiveness came wrapped in formality and delivered with the subtlety of a freight train. We will proceed, he said, but first, archival security. He opened the safe with deliberate movements, placed the envelope and fragments inside, and shut the door with a final metallic affirmation. Now, Wolfe said, we prepare. Prepare for what? She whispered. For the inevitable, Wolfe replied. Men like Delmar are fearless only until confronted with an incontrovertible truth. And what's that? I asked. That he is cornered, Wolfe said. Here, by us. I leaned against the wall. Kramer's going to love this. Kramer, Wolfe said mildly, is a man of duty. He will adapt. The girl looked from him to me. What will you do now? Wolfe drew a deep breath. I will summon Inspector Kramer, and tomorrow every participant in this sordid economy will be brought to this room. You will remain unseen until the moment requires otherwise. She shivered. I don't want to see Delmar again. You will not, Wolfe said, gentle but iron, unless I say so, and only then with protection. She exhaled shakily. Fritz appeared at the doorway. Dinner is ready, sir. Wolfe waved a hand. Later. Fritz blinked, astonished. Wolfe declining dinner was a sign the world was tilting on its axis. Archie, Wolfe said quietly, see Miss Shaw upstairs. Give her the room nearest the elevator. No phone, no lights near the window. I nodded. The girl stood, unsteady. As I guided her out, I looked back at Wolfe. He was already reaching for the bell cord, summoning the first steps of a war he intended to win. And for the first time in this case, I saw it clearly. Wolfe wasn't just protecting the girl. He was protecting all of us. If there's a particular atmosphere that settles over Nero Wolfe's office when he's preparing to corner a murderer, it's something between the hush of a cathedral and the tension of a high-stakes poker table. At 8:02 the next evening, the room felt tight enough to snap, and I'd seen it in all its moods. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle facing Wolfe's desk, like a tribunal awaiting sentencing. Fritz had polished every wooden surface, and Wolfe sat immovable behind his desk, fingertips steepled, expression as readable as an uncracked safe. At 8:07, the bell rang. I opened the door. Inspector Kramer entered first, coat wrinkled, cigar clamped between his teeth like he was using it to hold back his temper. He carried an envelope in his hand, most likely a warrant, but he didn't wave it around like a flag. He simply nodded and said, Wolfe. Inspector, Wolfe replied with a civil incline of his head, your presence is welcome. That alone would have knocked me over if I hadn't been braced for theatrics. Kramer blinked, then grunted something that could pass for courtesy. Behind him, the suspects filed in like attendees at a funeral where each man suspected he might be the corpse. The nightclub manager, a tall man with the defeated slouch of someone who spent too many nights telling too many lies. The cigarette girl, trembling but determined, eyes darting like a sparrow. Gerald Pike, quiet, stiff, hands twisting in his lapel. Two representatives from Kevil's brokerage firm, both of them looking like marble statues that had been carved to avoid culpability. And finally, Martin Delmar. Delmar entered with the composure of a man accustomed to elevators opening at the top floor. Silver hair immaculate, charcoal suit sharp enough to make Kramer's eyebrows twitch. He gave the room a quick cold once-over, then smiled at Wolfe. A peculiar gathering, Mr. Wolfe. I hope its purpose will become clear, Wolfe said. Take a seat. Delmar sat, crossing one leg over the other with the mild impatience of someone certain the world exists for his convenience. I stood by the globe, notebook in hand, watching faces, some nervous, some angry. Delmar, calculating, bored. That wouldn't last long. Wolfe lifted his chin. We shall begin. Silence fell like a stage curtain. Inspector Kramer, Wolfe said, is here not to menace but to bear witness. Tonight, I will present the sequence of events that reveals who murdered Raymond Kevil and who attempted to murder a young woman, presently alive and safe. That got Delmar's attention, his leg uncrossed. Wolfe continued, let us start with what binds you all, the Satin Crown nightclub. The manager flinched. The cigarette girl swallowed. Behind its velvet curtains, Wolfe said, a secondary economy thrived, one of blackmail, payoffs, coercion, and information flowing like blood through veins. Girls were used as couriers. Waiters handled envelopes more dangerous than any drink order, and men of finance treated service workers as invisible messengers. He paused. Invisible, but not blind. Kramer tapped ash into the tray and grunted, get on with it. Wolfe ignored him. Raymond Kevil, a man lacking imagination but possessing great fear, served as Delmar's intermediary. The brokerage funds moved through the nightclub's payroll. Payments went to dancers, to silence, to complicity. Delmar's posture tightened. Kevil, Wolfe said, began to feel the pressure of discovery. His courier, the young hatchet girl, started to recognize the currency she was carrying. She learned the value of secrets. She began to skim. A stir among the suspects. She was not malicious, Wolfe added, simply ambitious, until she realized she held the power to threaten both Keval and Delmar. Delmar's jaw set. "This is absurd. You have no—" "Silence," Wolfe said, not loudly, but with a weight that stopped the sentence mid-air. Kramer's eyebrows rose in reluctant admiration. Wolfe resumed. The girl overplayed her hand. Keval confronted her, but it was Delmar who panicked, because Keval had begun keeping records, and one of the waiters, now deceased, had overheard far too much. The nightclub manager shifted in his seat. "I didn't know." "You knew enough," Wolfe said. He turned his gaze to Kramer. "The waiter was murdered first, by Keval, out of fear." Kramer scribbled something on the warrant envelope. "And when Mr. Keval realized," Wolfe continued, "that his employer intended to sacrifice him, he sought leverage. He kept duplicates. He kept notes. He grew desperate." Wolfe's eyes traveled to Delmar. "You realized your employee was no longer controllable, and so you killed him." Delmar leaned back, affectation of composure slipping. "You can't prove I was there." "Archie time." I stepped forward, holding up a small glass vial. "Violet powder," I said. "Special scent used only in the private rooms. Found on your balcony rail, Delmar. Same powder found on the waiter's coat. Same powder found on the girl's blotter." Kramer added, "And a broken sapphire stone from your ring was found on Keval's rug. You replaced the ring the next day, but jewelers talk." Delmar's face flickered. First fear, then fury. "That's not proof," he said tightly. "Coincidence." Wolfe sighed. "Mr. Delmar, do not insult me. You paid Keval to manage the blackmail funds. You paid the girl directly, attempting to bypass the chain. You attempted to burn the evidence she kept. You murdered Keval when he threatened exposure. And you attempted to kill the girl, who survived only because she hid before you could reach her." He leaned forward. "This is not coincidence. It is arithmetic." The cigarette girl gasped. Pike trembled. One of the brokerage men whispered, "Good Lord." Delmar stood. "This is preposterous. You can't—" Kramer stepped in front of him. "Sit down." Delmar didn't. Kramer snapped the cuffs onto his wrists with a click that made the room exhale. "Martin Delmar, you're under arrest for the murders of Raymond Keval and Thomas Grady, and for attempted murder." Delmar stared at Wolfe as Kramer turned him toward the door. "You'll regret this, Wolfe." Wolfe blinked once. "I regret unripe peaches and inept discourse. I do not regret this." Kramer paused, looked at Wolfe, cleared his throat. "Good work," he said quietly. Wolfe inclined his head. "Satisfactory." "I swear on Manhattan bedrock." The big man almost smiled. Kramer led Delmar out. The others followed. Manager pale, cigarette girl sobbing, brokerage men whispering shocked arithmetic. Pike lingered, eyes haunted. "Go home," I told him, "and stop lying." He nodded once, then disappeared into the hall. When the door closed, Wolfe exhaled heavily, sinking back. "Archie." "Sir." "Bring Lydia and her sister down. They should hear that the danger has passed." I nodded and headed upstairs. The two women emerged cautiously, the younger one still shaken, Lydia holding her hand like she'd never let go again. In the office, Wolfe straightened. "You are both safe," he said. "Delmar is finished." The younger woman burst into tears, quiet, exhausted tears. Lydia hugged her fiercely. Even Wolfe seemed mildly moved, which is the emotional equivalent of Mount Rushmore shedding a single tear. "Archie," Wolfe said softly, "escort them home. Ensure they are not followed, and then return." "You're not coming?" I teased. He looked offended. "Certainly not. It is almost time for dinner." Fritz appeared in the doorway, as if conjured by the mention. "Dinner is ready, sir?" Wolfe's eyes closed in pleasure. "Excellent." I helped the girls with their coats and led them out. As we stepped onto the dimly lit sidewalk, I glanced back at the brownstone. Quiet, solid, a fortress designed to outlast the troubles of lesser men. The girl had waited on 35th Street, but Wolfe, the immovable, infuriating, incomparable Wolfe, was the one who made sure she hadn't been waiting in vain.